Okay, I'm just waiting for one or two people to be seated. I think everyone is more or less seated. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and I'm thrilled to welcome back Hanff Korelitz, our speaker, furthest from me, and I'm Blessing, our interlocutor. So I'm Diana Reich, the founder and currently senior artistic advisor of the festival. So you've met Jean, and I've introduced you to Anne as well, but what I really need to do, and it's my great pleasure to do, is to express all our gratitude on behalf of the festival to the sponsors for this event: board member Wenda Harris-Millard, Jay Millard, and Jay McLaughlin. Thank you. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about Anne. Many of you will know Anne, of course. Anne Blessing was Jean's interlocutor when she brought one of her previous novels, The Plot, to the festival. Anne taught English at Tulane University and at the College of Charleston, and has also worked in publishing, which is relevant to the story of this book. She currently advises high school seniors on their college essays. Anne is one of the founding board members of the Charleston Literary Festival, where she currently serves as secretary. So Hanff Korelitz is the author of 8 novels: The Latecomer and The Plot, both featured in this festival in the past, and currently in development for limited series. You Should Have Known, adapted as HBO's 2020 limited series, The Undoing, starring no less than Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant. And Admission, the basis for the 2013 film starring Tina Fey. This afternoon, June will be talking about her new book, The Sequel, which is both a novel in its own right and a follow-up to The Plot. Like its predecessor, The Sequel is a hilarious insider expose of the literary industry, as well as a page-turner which keeps you on the edge of your feet, focusing on an anti-heroine who would give Scarlett O'Hara a run for her money. A special bonus for our audience, some of you will have noticed this already, and the rest of you, I hope, will discover it, is that the novel happens to mention a literary festival here in Charleston. So it's my pleasure. So I'm going to hand you over now to Anne and Jean.
So thank you so much, Diana, and thank you all for being here. This is a great crowd, and it's so nice to be here with Jean in the Dock Street Theater, because when we spoke before, we were in the Satilli, and she's been at the Circular Church, but we love the Dock Street.
This is amazing. I feel like I'm at Ford's Theater, only I hope nobody gets shot.
Well, me too. And actually, I will say that we were relieved that when you mentioned the festival, that there were no fictional murders that occurred at the Charleston Literary Festival. But we really do feel like Jean and her husband are part of the Literary Festival family, because, excuse me, she's been here 3 times, and I think you're in competition with Andre Osman, who's also been here 3 times, but you're winning because you've included us in your novel. So anyway, well done. And before we start talking, I just wanted to get a sense of our audience, because Jean has written so many books, and these books are all in conversation with each other, as she says in the book. So first of all, could you just, show of hands, how many of you have read The Plot? Wow, okay.
That's great.
And how many of you were in the audience back in 2021 when we discussed The Plot? Okay, well, we're going to repeat maybe a few things, but that's okay, because we learned from the memory doc last week that you probably won't remember what we talked about. How many of you have read the sequel? Great. Okay, lots more good reading ahead of you. And then a lot of you may know Jean from her book, You Should Have Known, which was adapted into a series called The Undoing. And Diana mentioned that with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant. How many of you read that or watched the series? lots of people really enjoyed that. Yeah. And then my last, well, how many read The Latecomer? She was here in 2022 with the Oppenheimers. And then one last question. Who are the audacious readers out there who read a book called The Sequel without reading the book that it's resting on called The Plot? Anybody out there? Okay, Ooh. Good. Way to go.
Were you totally lost? I mean, really? I would be lost.
Well, we're probably going to give away a lot of the plot, but I hope that you'll go back and read the plot as well. So, Jean, for those of you who don't know you and haven't spoken to you like I have, could you just tell everyone how you got to go from poet to plot to sequel?
I can say this because maybe some of you saw my husband here last year, but when I went off to graduate school in England after 4 years of college, and I was a poet, and I had this dream of one day writing fiction, but I was way too scared to do it. And I was sitting over there in England, and I started to hear about this essay that had been published in the Kenyon Review. And those of us who are of a certain age will remember what life was like before the internet. And the way you would hear about something was you'd hear a rumble. You know, there'd be somebody would mention something in a letter, and then somebody else would mention it in a letter, and you'd start to have this sense that something was happening. Anyway, this essay was all about the state of poetry in America. And Donald Hall, the author of the essay, was basically arguing that there were too many pretty good poets out there. And there was nothing wrong with having lots and lots of pretty good poets. His argument was that the new MFA programs were turning out these pretty good poets, writing something that he called the McPoem. And the only downside of all this McPoetry being written by McPoets was that if you accept, as he did, that in every generation of poets there are maybe two who are Keats, it makes it a lot harder to find the one or two who are Keats, and therefore would everybody who is not Keats please stop writing. So now you understand why people were so upset about this essay. But when I read the essay, I thought, you know what? I don't think I'm Keats. And then I met Keats. He's my, I married him. And he is Keats. There's no question in my mind. And I think that was really the moment when I thought, I really have to find the bravery to try to write fiction, because I wanted to be Keats, but I wasn't.
Well, and you wrote and wrote and wrote.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time you wrote the plot, you had written 8, and I remember thinking, actually, you'd really written 9 because Crib is in the plot. But you'd also written this middle grade reader. You'd written...
And I wrote novels that were not published. I mean, there were many novels that were not published. Well, there were 2, but it felt like many because everybody rejected them. And I really had this kind of crisis moment where I said to myself, now I'm going to write something that somebody will publish. And that is how I ended up writing a thriller, which became my first published novel. But then I had a different problem, because now I was a thriller writer, and I was expected to write a sequel to the thriller that I'd written, and I didn't want to. So I set off kind of wandering through the wilderness, the genre wilderness, for 25 years, which is a great way to have nobody know your work, because people cannot settle on your work if you do not give them a genre of your own. At least that's what my publishers kept saying.
And now they are calling you the literary thriller writer.
I have been called so many things. I mean, I have been called a thriller writer, a mystery writer, which is incomprehensible to me because I don't read mysteries. A marriage thriller writer, I don't even know what that is. A literary novelist. And, listen, I am thrilled that I have readers, because I went on for many, many books without readers. I do not care how my readers think of me. The fact that they're reading my work is everything. So
I hope that Jake and Anna's marriage is not what's making you, an expert on marriage.
They do not have a good marriage. I, on the other hand, have been married for 37 years. So I'm good.
Well, I remember when you were here before, you were saying that even though you'd written all of these novels, you'd still never come upon a stranger reading one of your novels.
Yeah, that is still the fantasy. And I've gotten close. People have sent me photographs of people, strangers reading my work, but I have never seen it. So if you really want to make me happy, just plant yourself on a street in Charleston and let me pass you on the street. And then I can retire, put a line through that one. But no, it's never happened. But these days, you don't know. I mean, people are reading on their phones. They're listening to audiobooks. I'm listening to an audiobook, not exactly the second, but I was on the plane this morning. I could have walked right past somebody who was reading my book and not ever have known.
I know that they're reading it because everyone's been telling me that they're reading your book. So on the very last page of the book, on page 286, if you have your book with you, talking about Anna, she says about herself, writing fiction, though it called for a certain audacity, an autonomy, and a stubborn insistence on ownership, qualities she had always been blessed with in abundance. And I wondered, how is that you? It's definitely Anna. She's fighting for her story the entire book, but how is that you?
It's not me. I mean, I have never written autobiographically. I have never kind of fetishized my story. My story is not that interesting. I mean, I
disagree.
No, my personal story is I was a child of privilege. There were books in my home. I was very well educated. I was exposed to theater and the arts, and for me to have become anything but a novelist seems like a failure almost, but I really had every advantage, and it's not a rags to riches story, and it's not a overcoming the monster story. I'm going through all the classic plots here. It's not a voyage and return story. It's not a quest story. I grew up, fell in love with books, fell in love with writing, never wanted to do anything else. So I mean, my story is really more about perseverance, if it's about anything, because I did not have early success.
Mm-hmm. And when did you get to a point where you felt like you were successful?
Very recently. Yeah, very recently. And my hair is gray, so I'm not a young sprite anymore. And I had a very active literary generation, and there I was in my 20s watching my contemporaries just sail into print, and very famous names, you all know them, and I'm human, so I was very jealous, and my early work was not being published, and I just kept going, and the more I wrote, I think, this is not a mystifying concept. I think I got better, and I think most writers get better. It's a fortunate vocation to have, if you have it, because you're not like a ballet dancer where basically if you haven't made it by the time you're 19, it's over. I'm not a gymnast. I mean, Simone Biles to the exception, you're pretty much done by the time you're 20. We're just getting started. I don't even know. I don't think I could even name a great novel by somebody under 26, 27. I mean, most of the great novels that I've loved are written by people who have not many novels under their belt by the time they wrote them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you want to really wait a long time to get good at the thing that you do, be a writer.
Well, that's exciting for us as readers to think about what's in your future.
Oh, that's very
I
nice.
wanted to ask you about your voice and particularly the humor. And I'm looking out at this crowd, which I just have to be honest, at least half of this room is a really good friend of mine or related to me. So
that's not surprising.
I know they're going to laugh. And I'm so happy that you are so funny because they don't have to push it. They don't have to fake it. But it was fun to go back and read the plot and the sequel, and your absurdity and the humor, Jake and Anna, who have such different voices, mm-hmm. but the whole, correcting Victor Hugo's mistakes, that kind of thing.
That is real. That is a real thing. No, I'm sorry if you haven't read the sequel. This is not a big spoiler, but I mean, it's all made up except that one thing that you just happened to name. When I was an editorial assistant in the late 1980s, I mean, we saw a lot of terrible writing, of course, but this thing came into my very lofty publisher, Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and it was, I kid you not, This man had rewritten Victor Hugo's Les Miserables with all the mistakes corrected. And he had done this, and, you know, his name was on the cover, you know, out of copyright, he could. And I wrote this, you know, passionate letter back to him. You can't do this. You're not allowed to do this. And then, of course, I never heard back from him. And then about 6 months later, I met another editorial assistant from a different publisher. The same thing had happened. He had received it. He'd written this passionate response. And then I thought, we're all being pranked here. And all of these responses are going to be published in some book, Pretentious Young Editorial Assistants in New York. But no, he was a real guy. And now he is a character in the sequel. But not a major character.
Well, I do love that Jake and Anna being so different, but one thing they are good at is identifying the pretentious people. And, you know, and the great thing about pretentious people is that they never know that they're pretentious, as far as I'm aware. But there are plenty of them in the publishing and writing world.
Yeah.
And
I got a very sweet and very funny email from Jennifer Egan saying that she will never receive the phrase, "You're my favorite writer," the same after reading the sequel, which I thought, well, that's unfortunate, because I'm sure she hears that all the time.
Well, I am interested that you say hearing from Jennifer Egan, because I think your book makes us feel like we're all part of that writing community. I mean, you know, going to Ripley College and the plot, and laboring through all of those, the horrible writing that Jake has to deal with. You
Jake.
get to see it in the sequel if you haven't read the plot, because they all come back and Anna has a reading for them. And I wanted to be like Wendy and Miranda, who go sneak out and go have a drink next door. It's just awful, but it must be really fun for the writers. Are you hearing from all your writing friends?
I am. What's really surprising to me is how few people are angry at me.
Yes.
I remember one unkind or one unhappy review or message from the plot. Somebody who said, you know, I feel very disrespected and very triggered. And I thought, you should. I mean, like, I don't understand why more people aren't really annoyed. And it must be because nobody sees themselves as that aspiring writer. But maybe it's also true that we're all too embarrassed, because we do see ourselves that way and we don't want to make public our insecurity. I mean, the reason that Jake was such a resonant character for so many readers is that we are all Jake. I mean, we are all completely impacted by our sense of failure. I mean, and whether that failure, whatever level of failure that is, whether I never got my novel published, or my novel was published but nobody read it, or my novel was published, nobody read it, and, you know, Joe's novel was worse than mine and it was a New York Times bestseller. Whatever the version is, we all feel that we failed. And that's why, you know, I'm Jake. He's all of us.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get into your adaptations later, but I do want to ask about Mahershala Ali playing Jake. And I don't see him as kind of that, you know, down in the mouth guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, I guess we'll see. I mean, he's a great actor, obviously. I mean, I've had no contact with him.
So that's still in the works.
Yeah, I think it might be a film rather than a serial. That seems to be the last thing that I heard. You know, the section of Hulu that it's sold to no longer exists, and I think that's a common thing out there. I don't really know much about it.
And so once you've sold it or let go of it, that's all beyond your control.
Yeah, except that I have a producer of both of those projects who's very interested in kind of keeping me in the loop, and she's also commissioned me to write an original TV series, which I just sent the newest version off yesterday, and I'm really grateful to her, because I can't imagine who else would hire me to write a TV show. And I'm really learning as I go.
I don't know if you have any, acting ambition, but it would be kind of fun if you could play one of the, writing students. In the,
you know what? I would love to do that.
And you have an acting experience. Remember, you told us last time you were in Hugh Grant's first film.
That's true. I was an extra at Hugh Grant's first student film at Oxford University.
Well, to get back to the plot.
He had no memory of that. Yeah.
To get back to the plot and the sequel, the way I think of the two books is basically Jake, even though he doesn't know he's doing it, in the first one he steals Anna's story. And then in the sequel, she's trying to get her story back. She's trying to be in charge of her story. But how do you elaborate on that for us? How do you see the two books together?
I see them as cousins. I mean, they have different protagonists. If you've read the plot, you know why Jake cannot be the protagonist of the sequel. You want to kind of spell that out too much. She was just a character who, there was just so much more. I mean, by the time she got really interesting, the first book was over, basically. So to find, what I thought might be interesting was to go back to her and her disparaging attitude toward all writers and say, well, I wonder what would happen if she tried to write a novel and maybe found out that it's not so easy. Would that be a humbling experience for her or not? And by the time I started to write, I changed my mind about a part of that what ifs, so much so that the first line of the sequel is, it wasn't even that hard. So this is a real Legally Blonde moment. So how hard could it be to write a universally lauded best-selling novel? Come on.
Yeah, and she's continuing to complain about the writers and how they're so dramatic about how difficult it is.
Always whining about are they a 20 under 20 or a 30 under 30 or a 90 under 90, and who got a box around their review and who got a star next to their review and who has the biggest line in the signing tent, and there's so many things. There's so many ways to feel like a failure, and we all do it. So
when you were here with us in 2021 talking about the plot, I'm almost positive that you did not have any plans to write the sequel, right?
No.
So how did that happen?
I was packing for a move, and it just popped into my head. I have this memory of kind of the dust of these books coming down off my bookshelves and going into a box. And this is the wonderful thing about mindless activity, because your subconscious just kind of serves up things, and that's what happened. And a few weeks later, I said to my agent, I'm thinking I might want to write a sequel to the plot, and she said yes, and we're going to call it The Sequel. And I just started laughing. I thought that was the funniest thing. So of course I do whatever my agent says. And what I didn't even notice this when the New York Times review came out about a month ago online, but it was only in the paper last weekend, and I didn't notice, or maybe they didn't have a title when it was online, but the title of the review of the sequel in the New York Times Book Review was The Review, which I just thought was so funny. I think they completely got into the whole kind of meta thing about it.
So how many of you saw the review? It was Sunday, right? It
came
in
out
print
Sunday last weekend. And
so how do you feel about being the meta author?
I did not set out to be the meta author. I don't think of myself as a satirist. I think you have to be very clever to be a satirist, and I don't think I set out to do that, but I've been knocking around this industry for a long time, and I guess I've been up, I've been down, I've heard every kind of story, I've seen every kind of pretense, every kind of bad behavior, and and I've seen wonderful things happen, wonderful careers happening to deserving writers who have worked very hard. And look, at the end of the day, we all love language and we all love books, and the dream is to be, this is to be sitting in front of people who, even though we don't know each other, you're not my friends, cousins, my mother's former college classmates, children, for whatever reason, you took a day or two out of your life to read something that I wrote. And that was the dream. I mean, it really is.
And meanwhile, there's Anna who can't even think of an author she would drive across town to hear.
That's right. She's like, why would you do that?
Well, one of the meta things that people just love is the chapter titles.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about that for a minute. And I knew something was up because my daughter and all her friends are reading the Colleen Hoover books.
Right.
So it did jump out, but then I didn't really get it, as it went along. But tell us about how you came, and in case you haven't read the book, at the very end you can flip and it's this great list of they're all sequels. So tell us about that.
Yes. So I was on a plane and I was thinking about How to Save Your Own Life, which is the sequel to Fear of Flying, which I just did buy the book, that thing in the New York Times Book Review. And one of the questions was, what's your favorite sequel? And one of my favorite sequels is How to Save Your Own Life. And that is a great title. And I was thinking, wow, maybe I should use that as the chapter title for a certain chapter late in the sequel. And then I thought, well, why not make them all the titles of sequels? So I just started compiling a long list of sequels. Not every sequel was usable. I couldn't use Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. But How to Save Your Own Life, I could use. So I made a long list, and then when I finished, I set about matching them up with the chapters, ideally in a way that How to Save Your Own Life would become the title of a chapter in which someone was indeed trying to save their own life.
Well, I thought that there were so many prequels that would have made good chapter titles, like the Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and there was A Presumed Innocent, and there were also a couple that I didn't realize they even had sequels. So you've opened up a whole new reading list for people.
I have to be honest. I have not only have I not read every one of these sequels, I have not read many of the books that they are sequels to. So, I never made it through Catch-22, let alone the sequel to Catch-22.
Well, I do want to ask about the title of the very last chapter, which is Anything is Possible. And Anna does leave to go, wherever she's going, to Wichita or wherever these sort of mid-sized towns.
Maybe she'll come to Charleston.
Well,
then they'll invite me back.
Generally, we like to have anyone. But are you thinking about, what do you call the sequel to a sequel?
I mean, my agent has already entitled it, she wants to call it The End. But who knows? I think at this point I'm pretty much in for a penny, so I'm certainly not writing a sequel right now, a sequel to the sequel right now. But I wouldn't, let me put it this way, I would not be surprised if I eventually did.
If you had known you were planning to follow up the plot, what would you have done differently?
So many things differently. I would have given myself so much more to work with. I would have left clues everywhere. I didn't do that. Those of you who've read the sequel already will notice that there's a piece of furniture that comes in for a lot of attention. The only reason for that is that a character at the end of the plot is talking about their house, and they mentioned that this piece of furniture was in the house when they bought it. I mean, I just put that there. I never thought that it would become important, but it was one of the important things that I had to work with in this book. I mean,
did it drive the plot of the sequel? That piece of furniture?
It kind of did, yeah. I mean, there were things that had to connect different time periods, and that piece of furniture was one of them.
The other thing that carried through was the avocado stove from the 1970s, and we had that same stove.
And the pineapples.
Yes, we have a lot of those.
And I do want to say the pineapple.
Do have a lot of those.
It was in Charleston, South Carolina, in 1999 that I learned the significance of the pineapple. I was the only time I'd ever been to Charleston before. The festival invited me. We were expecting our second child, and we were having a little escape holiday before that third trimester when you can't go anywhere. And we came to Charleston, and we went on a house tour. And the guide was telling us about how the pineapple was so important that they would basically rent it from the harbor, bring it to the dinner table, then bring it back to the ship so that somebody else could rent it. And it suddenly occurred to me that was why there were stencils of pineapples in, 19th century and 18th century American houses. That's why they're there, not because pineapples are native to New England. You know?
I mean, we like to think that everything always goes back to Charleston. So
well, in this case, it did, and it was. If you read the plot, you know that the pineapples are very important. So, thank you, Charleston.
One of the things that is different between the two in the plot, you have the crib sprinkled throughout, and you said that one of the reasons to include it was for clues, but also to show that Jake is a good writer, that we can trust, that he's struggled, but he really can write. Did you think about including Anna's writing?
You know what? That might happen in the future.
Oh, okay.
but to extend that motif of the book within the book, there is a book within the sequel, but it is not by Jake and it is not by Anna. It's by somebody else.
Yes. Okay. So in the plot, there are a lot of books within the book. There's a lot of writing, and the way Anna's past is revealed to us it's such a pastiche. And I love the way it's done, because even though I read it very carefully, sometimes I would get confused. I had to make a chart. What were the different names that different characters were called by different.
I have that same chart.
Okay, that was my question. How did you keep it all straight? And I think it served a very important purpose, which is that it makes Anna unreliable. We can't trust her. We don't really know. Her story's coming from so many different places.
Well, I did have to create a spreadsheet. But what really does complicate things for me as well as for the reader is that if you read something in a book, something about our reading brain assumes that it's true. Even if we know that we're reading a novel, which is kind of by definition not true. If we read it in a book, it's got to be true. So we can read in the plot Jake's novel Crib and think, aha, this is what really happened, but it's not. We can read the novel that is excerpted within the sequel and think, this is what really happened, but it's not, because A, these people don't have the facts, and B, it's a novel, so you cannot assume that anything's true. The only time that you can take a reported incident as truthful is when the person who experienced it reports it to us, the reader. And, even then, they might be lying. But if you really want to find out what this story is that weaves through the plot and the sequel, listen to the person it happened to.
Well, and what so many of us learned with the memory doctor is that even in telling it, you're not telling the truth, because it's not a computer, it's not a photograph, you're constructing it.
And we're comforting ourselves, if a traumatic thing happens, and it does, there are ways to protect ourselves from bad recent news. Sorry. That kind of thing.
Well, so I want to turn to, ask one more question about Anna before I forget. Writing about somebody like her, I mean, you just mentioned that the reader wants you to think it's true. And I think as a reader, you also want to pull for the protagonist. So anti-heroes must be so much fun to write for you.
Yeah.
Because even with all these horrible things that Anna was doing, I was still rooting for her.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's wrong with me?
No, nothing is wrong with you. I mean, I have noticed that in myself too. And I think it's I think, when you're presented with a protagonist in a novel, unless it's Hitler, or somebody like that, they get a real leg up in our estimation. We are programmed to root for the protagonist. We have to be, unpersuaded to root for that person. I mean, I can't be the only person in this room who read the Ripley novels and wanted him to succeed. I mean, this is a terrible, terrible person. And the thing about Anna is that all she really wants, all she has ever wanted, is to be left alone. And who cannot identify with that? You know, people left one another alone, there'd be a lot more happy people around. Now, she takes that to a bit of an extreme, but you know, she's not out for fortune or fame. She doesn't want to rule the world. She wants to be left alone. And in writer speak, or in literary speak, not so much writer speak, but literary speak, that is equivalent to she wants to be in control of her own narrative. That's all she wants.
So there's the very powerful scene in the book she's doing something very sick, so I don't want to get into too many details, but it's the first time where she actually gets to tell her story. Mm-hmm. And she is so empowered by it. And it reminded me of really almost every single session we've had this year, and really for 8 years, where it's about storytelling and how important storytelling is. Mm-hmm. And that's what you've made your life doing. Well, first of all, I wondered if Anna had told her story earlier, would we not have all these dead bodies? But also just storytelling for you, that's what you've devoted your life to. Can you just elaborate on why
because
so important?
It's the greatest thing that I can say about another person is that they've written a book that has transported me. A couple of days ago, I was answering these adorable letters from a classroom of kids in Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, and they'd send me pictures of all of their favorite books, and I was struck by how many of them were about animals. And I started to write them this letter about Black Beauty, which I think is the first novel I really loved. Mm. And I still think about it all the time. And I think about it, and I'm moved by Black Beauty. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Okay. Margaret Sewell, is that her name?
Anna Sewell. And there's this chapter called Poor Ginger. I mean, even thinking about it, I'm so sad. And, you know, it's a beautifully written novel. I still remember sentences of it. And I think when I read that novel as a, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, even though I was completely, submerged in the story, I never lost sight of the fact that a person had sat down and written that and made it. It didn't just spontaneously exist. Somebody had made it. And I thought that is just the height of accomplishment, to be able to do that for other people and myself, I guess. But, if you love language and you love stories, this is the Acropolis. This is like the what you want to be able to do. So that's been a lifetime.
So we had this very moving session with Nikki Giovanni on Monday, and she said she writes for herself, and she was telling the young writers, don't write for the agents, don't write for the audience, write for yourself. But who are you thinking of? I mean, I know you said you have the obsession about the sentences, and you have to.
Well, part of me still thinks like a poet, and I write with my ears. I can't knowingly leave an ugly sentence on the page. I'm sure there are many ugly sentences there, but if I'm aware of it, I can't go to the next sentence without fixing it. I'm still fixing them. I mean, in my copy of the sequel, which I didn't bring with me, there are, lines crossed out, and in hopes that maybe if there's another edition, maybe I'll fix them. But
do you have a reader in mind, or you're thinking of someone when you write?
The unknown person, the person who's not my mom's cousin's daughter's,
right.
Somebody who, reached the book because they went to camp with me. They had very good reasons to read a book, absolutely. But the stranger who really has no reason to read it, except that they want to, that's the reader.
So, Jean, I think in so many of your books, or at least the ones I've read, you have these liars, these people that are assuming an identity, taking someone else's identity, or really leaving behind their own, past and childhood. Where does that come from?
I got asked this a lot at the time of You Should Have Known, and that was the right book to ask it about, because it was about a therapist, and my mother was a therapist. And my mother used to, not share the name. She was she observed all the rites and rituals, but she would say, I have this patient who's a brilliant woman. She went to Harvard. She's got 500 people working under her. She makes millions of dollars a year. She's brilliant, and she's with a man who is cheating on her, stealing from her, doing things that should be obvious. Why doesn't she see it? I mean, these were kind of cautionary tales that she wanted my sister and me to hear. But the fact is that we're all at the mercy of people who lie to us, unless we're liars ourselves, in which case, we're prepared. Oh my gosh, I am not going to say what I want to say right now. I'm just not going to say that. But there are liars among us, and there are many, many, many people who believe them.
So in some of your books, the liars do get punished. I mean, the people who are trying to, pretend to be someone. I mean, I'm thinking of the Devil and Daniel Webster, the latecomer, or, and Anna doesn't really get punished. I mean, I just think that's
Not
sort of
yet.
an interesting concept. Yeah,
I mean,
know.
sometimes liars don't get punished.
Right. Okay. Well, I can't wait.
What am I going to say?
I can't wait to read it. Okay, moving on. Last time in 2021, when Jean was here, she said, when I'm in a town, the way I like to get to know it is I like to know what the neighborhood pub is. So take me to a pub. So I took her.
You took me
do you
to that
remember?
place,
Yeah,
yeah.
I took her to the Blind Tiger. And so when you're in the signing line later, you can tell her if you have a better pub or bar or whatever. But I remember that you were working through this big decision about which author to use for your audiobook. And I know we both like audiobooks.
Yeah.
I'm walking my dogs all the time, but I also like to own the book. So I'll listen to it and then I like to buy it because I like to go back and...
You're our favorite kind of reader.
I know. Well, but I wondered, what are you... Julia Whelan reads the book and she read The Women, Kristen Hanna, and she's got
read The Latecomer?
The Latecomer,
Yeah.
right. So how do you... We love Eduardo Ballerini. He was here this year, but how do you go about selecting that?
I am so lucky that Julia Whelan, I listen to audiobooks all the time, but I don't really register who's reading them. My editor said to me, we think we found the perfect person for The Latecomer. She did the most amazing job. We became friends. She hadn't read the plot, and I said, I really would love for you to consider reading the sequel. And she didn't say yes right away. She read the plot, and she was in. I had just said to her, I don't want to tell you about the character, but I will tell you that you're going to have a lot of fun with this character. And she was just so. Did anybody listen to it, the sequel? Oh gosh, you have such a treat. I mean. I even say to people, don't buy it, listen to it.
Yeah. Well, it changed the way that I thought about Arthur Pickens Esquire, because being from the South, I don't give people accents when I'm reading, but then Julia did this sort of boss hog kind of accent. So anyway, it can change the way you perceive a character.
Yeah, and I'm not good with accents or anything like that.
Yeah.
I can't even do an Irish accent, and I've lived with an Irishman for 37 years.
So, and then as far as the adaptations, I know the plot's in production, and The Latecomer too is
The Latecomer is a little bit behind the plot. The plot's a little farther along, but this producer is very tenacious, and she's very determined, and I feel as if the pandemic and then the strikes just really upended a lot of projects. But luckily, I have somebody who isn't the usual, I'll throw it against the wall, and if it doesn't stick, I'm on to 5 other things. She's going to get them made, which is great.
Well, it's exciting. Well, she and I have this, writing, enjoying high school students and college admissions. She did all this research when she was writing Admission, which became a film with Tina Fey that but I like the book better. I like your book better. But she obviously doesn't sleep because she's writing fiction, nonfiction, but she also has adapted a play. Will you tell them about The Dead?
Sure, I'd love to. So many years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, I was in this mansion in New York City, the American Irish Historical Society, with my son. We were watching a one-man Christmas carol. it was almost exactly 10 years ago, and it was a little boring, and my mind started to wander, and I thought somebody should do The Dead in this building, James Joyce's classic story, The Dead. And I thought this was such a great idea that I kept trying to give it away to people. I mean, I love theater, but I'm not involved in theater. And everybody kept saying, yeah, it's a great idea. You should do that. So my sister and I became theater producers, which, you know, we didn't know what we were doing. And then the next thing was that people kept saying, where's the script? Who's doing the script? Can I see the script? We didn't have a script. So I said, how hard can that be? And I wrote the script for The Dead as an immersive play. But luckily, as I said, I'm married to an Irishman who's much more knowledgeable about James Joyce than I am. So we ended up doing it together. So then my sister and I produced it with Irish Repertory Theatre. We did it in 2016, 2017, 2018. Then we had a pandemic. And we are about to return in 2 weeks for our 4th run. It is immersive, meaning it's in this 1900 mansion in New York City, and we serve the famous meal in the middle of it. So it's a very scary to produce, not to come to. Wonderful evening at the theater, especially if you love James Joyce and or immersive theater and or holiday stories and or Ireland and or the year 1904. And it's called The Dead 1904. And if any of you are in New York over the holidays, I hope you will come.
So I'm going to turn it over to questions in just a minute, but I'm going to do a little rapid fire really quick with Jean, just so you can get a sense of her personality. And these are just little questions. But okay, Jean,
I think
you ready?
they already have a sense of my personality.
I know. But anyway, okay, ready. All right, favorite pub?
Favorite pub?
Yes.
You know, I'm actually not a pub person. It might have to be the
Blind Tiger. It's
yeah,
like,
I mean,
right, we could go over the back wall right across
there
the
was
street.
some famous drink there, right?
Long
punch
Island
thing?
iced tea.
Oh, okay.
Favorite Greek myth?
Oh, now you're talking. Okay.
She loves Dolaires.
'Cause I love
Dolaires'
Dolaires' Book of Greek
Myths.
Myths. It's the single most important book I ever read. And I'm going to go with Arachne because, first of all, I am arachnophobic, so it's a weird choice. But I love the story of Arachne and Athena.
I think you said this earlier, but anyway, favorite sequel other than your own?
How to Save Your Own Life by Erica
Yeah.
Jong.
Favorite contemporary author?
Oh, God. There are so many that I love. But I will say that the person who, when I hear he has a new sequel, I go rushing off to the store, is Thomas Perry. I
Okay.
love Thomas Perry's suspense novels.
Dartmouth or Princeton?
Oh, okay. Here I'm like, what's her name? Josephine Baker. I have two loves, France and America. I went to Dartmouth. I'm a very proud Dartmouth alum, but I am also a 30-year Princeton faculty spouse and a Princeton mom. But I would say Dartmouth because... do you have Dartmouth people here? Because Dartmouth has undergone a great transformation, and I'm very proud of it.
It's special. Favorite Shakespeare villain or play?
I don't think I have a favorite Shakespeare play. I feel like I've seen all of them way too many times.
If
Sorry.
you weren't a writer, you'd be a...
Antique dealer.
All right. Questions. They'll be coming around with mics, and please stand up if you can. And if you don't have any questions, then I have more, but my sister-in-law in the front row, Devin Hanahan, always has a question.
I've loved your books. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for being here, and good job, Anne. I have so many questions, but I'm going to ask the most simplistic one. I'm utterly terrified now to stand in line and have my book signed
I don't
by
blame
anyone
you.
after reading Anna's reaction to the readers in line. I mean, I laughed when I read those, but I also thought I'm never doing that again. Can you tell us about any interactions you've had with people whose books you signed that have really impacted you, or is it as awful as
lovely
Anna says it is?
experiences. And you know, Again, I'm happy to have readers, so I am very happy. But I think what you're referring to is there's this thing in the sequel about sort of beware the end of the line, because that person in the end of the line who subtly steps back and lets people go in front of them, they're not just being altruistic, they're, they want to be the last person in line because they want to go out for a beer with you. That didn't come. I read about that in a memoir by Richard E. Grant, the English writer. He wrote this whole book about a book tour that he did in England, and he had a terrible name that he used to refer to the people at the end of the line. I will not share it. But I mean, I appropriated that and put it in my book. But and the only other reason I feel okay about saying this is that I have done that end of the line thing. I did it once. To be completely honest, it was a comedian. I was with my son. My son really wanted to meet the comedian, and we kept saying, "Oh, you go ahead of us. You go ahead of us." It's not a good thing to do. Didn't work out for us. So I felt like, well, I've done this questionable thing, so I can make fun of it.
We didn't even talk about Book the Writer, which...
Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to thank both of you for being here today, first of all. As someone who's kind of wary of her future career, have you ever had a moment or a thought that kind of solidified your path as a writer, or like made you confirm that, yes, I do want to write?
I never needed confirmation that this was what I wanted. It was always what I wanted. There were many moments when I thought, this is not going to happen, you know. My late 20s, early 30s, when I was writing novels and they were not getting published, was very, very hard. And many years of sort of not really making a living at this, and being fortunate that I was married to somebody who was employed by a university, so I could afford to write novels and be home with my kids. I mean, I was very, very lucky. But I never needed confirmation that it was what I wanted to do. I needed plenty of confirmation that I would get there. And again, that was a pretty recent thing. So you got to play the long game. And the other thing is, as I said before, I've now seen many, many literary careers. The ones that look good at the beginning don't necessarily look good at the end. So although I've had this weirdo career where I've been bouncing around for many, many books, I'm here, you know. I'm in Charleston, and I am very, very thrilled to be here. So, you know, there's that Kierkegaard quote about how life can only be lived forwards, but it has to be understood backwards. I am so grateful now about everything that happened, but I cannot say that I was all grateful and sanguine when it was happening.
There's a question up in the front, and while you're walking, do we have book clubs here? Are there any book clubs here? Oh, she's standing up. Okay, sorry.
Thank you both. Have you murdered anybody? and I wondered how you got the scene with the, I won't ruin it for anybody, but down the stairs with the pants, if that's, how did you even dream that up?
Down the stairs with the pants.
With the pants down.
Don't know what you're talking about. Here's what I will say. I have noticed that when I do kill somebody, it tends to be pretty quick and painless. I mean, I'm not a violent person. I don't like reading about violence. I don't like writing about violence. There's not a lot of blood in the murders. I've noticed that. So that guy felt no pain. That's all I have to say.
So one of the most intimidating hurdles for a writer is landing an agent. Mm-hmm. How did you land your first agent?
My first agent, and I've had many agents. My first agent was somebody, I have a feeling he was a patient of my father's. And this was when I was in graduate school and I was only a poet. So the fact that he was willing to even consider being an agent to somebody who only dreamed about writing novels was kind of amazing. He never sold anything of mine. Then I was working in publishing, and I kind of had a great view of the whole world of agents. And I was able to persuade one of the agents who had authors at FSG to take me on. He also never sold anything of mine. Then I had another agent who's still a friend. She also did not sell anything of mine. And then around the time that I had this epiphany that I was going to write a novel that would be publishable, I thought of a woman that I had met through a nannying job that I had, and the woman I was nannying for was a client of this agent. And I wrote to her and I said, I don't know if you remember me, I was the nanny, I've written this legal thriller, would you be willing to read it? And she said yes. So she became the first agent of mine who actually sold something. One book later, she closed her agency. And she called me and she said, I'm closing my agency. And I remember I was cleaning out cat boxes at the time. It was a bad time to get a call like that. And I remember thinking, well, that's that, because I didn't have anything. And then she said, but I found you a new agent. And it turned out to be Suzanne Glock and William Morris, who has, the one who named the sequel, and without whom I would not be here. So I felt so incredibly lucky. Suzanne had read, I think, my second novel, and she liked it enough to be supportive of anything I wrote in the future. Most things that I wrote in the future. That's my agent saga. But I mean, the thing you have to remember is they're looking for writers. That's what they do. That they are looking for you. But they may not be looking exactly for you, or that exact one may not be looking exactly for you. But somebody out there is. So if they say, if there's a why, this isn't for me because, take it in, especially if you're hearing it more than once. Be willing to make adjustments and keep going. It's all about the keeping going.
Don't let your manuscript go in that hole.
the black hole of
Yes.
Salter. Yeah. Also
Hi.
based on a real person, by the way. Sorry. Yeah.
So was there any time, like, as a writer where, like, you created a character and, like, looking back, you kind of realized that they kind of reflected some part of yourself?
Not really. I mean, just beyond what I was saying earlier about, the character of this failed writer, very, very personal. But because deep down we are all failed writers, that's how we feel about ourselves. So, but I do not write autobiographically. I'm deeply uninterested in my, my growing up story. I probably am never going to write a memoir or anything like that. I'm much more interested in making things up. So no, I really haven't. Yeah. There's somebody there. I'm behind you, yeah. Oh, there too.
Hi, with the rise of and the push for generative AI into creative industries for like writing and art, is there any advice you can give on that or any thoughts about the situation?
I'm pretty unhappy about it. I mean, I think it's quite terrifying. I do tend to stick my head in the sand about a lot of things, and that's sort of one of them. I don't think there's an imminent threat to fiction because I'm pretty sure that an AI-generated novel is not going to be that great. But 10 years from now, who knows? I wish I had a sunnier answer. Yeah.
As an aspiring writer myself, I was just wondering, like, what kept you going exactly throughout the years that you didn't like receive any recognition or reward?
One part stubbornness, 2 parts, what else can I do? I mean, I have very few marketable skills. I'm really good at making chocolate dipped strawberries. I can help people with their college applications, but I set my mind to it, and it was really all I ever wanted.
You should know that she does run a business, Book the Writer, which is pop-up book group. So she's good at some other things too.
Well, okay, yeah. That is a series I run in New York, but also on Zoom. My friend Kathy Koala, somewhere in here, she had, during the pandemic, when we were 100% on Zoom, Kathy was down here in South Carolina helping me, work out the technology. But basically, we do about 25 of these events a year, and we have 20 people in an apartment in New York City, and then however many want to join us online. And, we have Jane Ann Phillips. I don't know if any of you just saw Jane Ann. Yeah. We did her book about couple months ago. We just had Joyce Carol Oates. We're about to have Taffy Brodesser Ackner. And
We had Griffin
Dunn.
Dunn
Oh,
last
yeah, that's
week, and-
right.
and you have Griffin Dunn coming up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. He just sent me an email saying, I see you're going to Charleston. I had a fantastic time, and there you go. Yeah. So that's a lot of fun. But one of the reasons that I did that was that I'm actually not that comfortable in front of other people, and I thought that it was a way to like force me to get in front of people again and again, so that if I ever got to the point where I would be at a place like Charleston, I wouldn't be a sweaty blob of fear.
Did everyone get? I think I didn't see any more hands, so I think that's. Is there one more? One last question. Is it quick?
You're going to bring it in exactly
Okay,
on time.
perfect.
Look at that.
Hi, I was just wondering, since you had other novels that were not published and you have more experience, as you said, would you rewrite any of them?
You know, after I had that legal thriller accepted, I showed those first 2 novels to my agent, the one I had met while I was a nanny. And I expected her to say, great, 2 finished novels, I'll just go out there and sell these. And she said, no. She said, you've gotten better, put these away, and move on. And of course, that was the right thing. And I really believe that if those books had been published, I really would have had a very abbreviated, very different career. So, like life must be lived forwards, can only be understood backwards. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, we all think you've gotten better, even though we haven't read those novels, and we're just so glad that you came here to share it with us. So, Jean, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jean and Anne, for a session that in a way mirrored the sequel. That it was about fiction, it was about literature, and it was also about the publishing industry. So thank you very much for a very revealing and very entertaining session.
Thank you, Connie.
Obviously, what we would like you to come back with the sequel to the sequel, in other words, the end.
Maybe.
So we'll be looking out for that. And in case any of you were wondering who this mysterious Irish Keats is, who Jean is married to, that's the marvellous Irish poet Paul Muldoon, who was here last year. So now Jean will be selling books, obviously, at the Buxton pop-up stall. Buxton Books, our official bookseller. But just before you leave, I'd like to thank our sponsors again. I hope all 3 of you in the audience. That's Wenda Harris Millard, who's our board member, Jay Millard, her husband, and Jay McLaughlin. Thank you all very much. So some of you already know the ritual for getting books signed. If you go out through the doors at the back, that's the quickest way to do it and to join the bookstore that way. But if you lose your way, you'll be directed there.